It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story.
How are you keeping people motivated to deliver the support and the humanitarian work you're doing in such conditions?
Too many have been killed. The heir to the throne joins the calls for an end to the fighting in Gaza. The fear fueling a focus on the need for a ceasefire as America, as well as the Labour Party here, shift their stance. And the youngest victims of the hatred following the October the 7th attacks. The investigation after a baby's birth certificate was defaced.
Now the situation over here is not good. To be a Jew in the UK, to be a Jewish in the UK is very hard nowadays.
Also tonight, the end of the search for the Alkali attacker, as police believe they found his body in the River Thames. The historically high cost of infant baby formula as the markets regulator launches an official review. The trouble over the rising cost of council tax as well, and the people where authorities are bankrupt will pay even more. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. The pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza is growing on both sides of the Atlantic tonight. At the United Nations, America again vetoed an attempt to demand an immediate ceasefire, but for the first time, it signalled it could put its own resolution calling for a temporary cessation in fighting. Here in the UK, both the likely next government and the heir to the throne appear to join those calls, Prince William making what appeared to be a calculated intervention, saying that too many have been killed and that fighting must end as soon as possible. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
The royal face of a growing public outcry.
Health system that is totally collapsed.
Prince William hearing first-hand accounts of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The future king making a rare and significant intervention into global politics.
How are you keeping spirits up in your organisation? How are you keeping people motivated to deliver the support and the humanitarian work you're doing in such conditions?
This visit to the British Red Cross followed a strongly worded statement from the Prince of Wales. He said he is deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, that there is a desperate need for increased humanitarian support, and called for an end to the fighting as soon as possible. The Prince, not the only major public intervention in this crisis today. In Westminster, the Labour Party has faced weeks of internal strife about its position on the conflict. Now, a new stance backing an immediate ceasefire.
We have set down a motion calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that Israel can't use its armed forces now to try and secure the release of the hostages?
It's really important. A humanitarian ceasefire that's immediate requires both sides to lay down their arms.
I'm still confused. Are you saying that targeted action can be taken by Israel to release hostages, to free hostages, or not?
We are calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire which requires both sides to lay down their arms.
The Foreign Secretary commemorating the war dead in the Falklands. The government says no permanent ceasefire can happen until all Israeli hostages are released.
We think that what we need is a pause in the fighting and the hostages to come out and aid to go in. That should happen straight away. Then what we need to do is to turn that pause into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. Now, lots of things will have to happen in order for that to be the case and for fighting not to resume.
For months, the two main parties have been in lockstep in their position towards Israel and Gaza. But as of today, no longer. After weeks of pain and contortion, the Labour Party's changed its stance, now telling Israel to stop fighting. A new position they adopted just a day before the SNP put the issue to a divisive vote. And it comes amid signs of a wider shift in the EU and the US, and closer to home. Too many have been killed, said Prince William today, who is planning more engagements to highlight the human suffering caused by this war on both sides in the weeks to come. Neither royal nor political interventions that likely to change what happens in this conflict. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
What is driving those calls for a ceasefire is the plight of 1.5 million Gazans crowded into the southern part of the territory. One man we spoke to there today said he called on the entire world to see Gaza's people. He was speaking as America vetoed another attempt at the United Nations to call for a ceasefire, but drafted a new call to oppose any further advance by Israel. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
They are images which tell their own story. The coastal road in Gaza City, an area destroyed weeks ago in Israel's offensive. The crowds were here for food, flour from an aid truck. The gunfire, say locals, was the Israeli military. We can't be sure. Gazan officials have been using live rounds to disperse crowds. Either way, it's panic and chaos. We call on the entire world to see Gaza's people, he says. I call on the Muslim world, the Arab world, the UN to bring food to the people. In the United Nations, a body which has shown its limitations so much with this war, another vote for a ceasefire.
Those against?
And another American veto. But this time, an apparent shift in America's position.
While we cannot support a resolution that would put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, we look forward to engaging on a text that we believe will address so many of the concerns we all share, so that we can have a temporary ceasefire.
The use of the word ceasefire by an American as part of a resolution they plan to table soon. A shift? Well, at the State Department, it was all about semantics.
From a policy perspective, we want to achieve a temporary stop in fighting. You can call that a ceasefire, you can call that a pause. Ultimately, we want to see the fighting stop so hostages can get out, hostages can be released, and humanitarian assistance can get in.
And so if there is a shift in America's position, it is subtle to say the least. The debate the UN Security Council is having is the same one they've been having for months, the nuance between a pause and a ceasefire. And on Israel's proposed invasion of Rafah, the Americans are not saying don't do it. They're just saying don't do it without a plan for civilians. There's a difference there. Whether Israel does have a plan for civilians and whether it's viable is not yet clear. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's messaging is typically straight.
We are committed to continuing the war until we achieve all of its goals, which means the elimination of Hamas, the release of all the hostages, and the promise that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. There is no pressure that can change that.
100,000 Gazans are now either dead, injured, or missing. Those are United Nations numbers, a UN unable to find agreement or peace. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, live now to our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills and to Sam Coates at Westminster. Rhiannon, it is quite a step, isn't it, for a senior royal to get involved in an ongoing and sensitive conflict. What was the intention?
Oh, interventions like this are incredibly rare. So when you do see them, you know that in this case, Prince William has deliberately decided to wade in. I think that visit that he made to the region in 2018 clearly has had a lasting impression on him. You can see in the strength of the words in that statement where he doesn't hold back, calling for the fighting to stop as soon as possible. The one phrase, though, that it was pointed out to me that he doesn't use is ceasefire. He could have done, but he didn't. And I think that's because him and his team wanted to make sure that it wasn't seen as too political. They also decided today to take him to the British Red Cross, a symbol of neutrality, where I think they saw it was a safe space where he could discuss his concerns about what's going on in Gaza. Within the statement, though, he also talks about Israeli hostages. And we also know that in the coming weeks, he is going to visit a synagogue to talk about anti-Semitism. I think what's particularly interesting about this statement is when you put it in the context of his new role as heir to the throne. I'm told that he did meet up with his father, the king, in Norfolk over the weekend. I think we can assume they would have talked about this statement. This is an issue that also concerns the monarch greatly. We know that he's had briefings from the British Red Cross. But on this instance, he's allowed his son to make that big public statement. And I think what we've seen is an heir to the throne, again, who is prepared to challenge things, who in some ways is prepared to risk their reputation if they think it's going to make a difference.
And Sam, a big step for Labour today on the conflict too. So what can we expect tomorrow in Parliament?
Look, I think there's huge importance attached to the fact that Labour has decided to break the cross-party consensus, the top two-party joint position over what's going on in Israel and in the Middle East and with Hamas. And I think the ramifications of that, bluntly, are going to be felt for weeks and months to come. The Labour leadership did it for a couple of reasons. It's been quite a long time in the making. I think partly they changed position to endorse an immediate ceasefire because of pressure from MPs, from supporters. I think the campaign team worried about votes. The Scottish Labour Party endorsed an immediate ceasefire at the weekend. It was the status quo for the Labour Party was becoming unsustainable. But there was a second reason, which is that tomorrow the SNP are going to force votes on who does and doesn't back an immediate ceasefire. And Labour spent a lot of time crafting their own motion in order to get their own side behind them. And that tactic tonight looks like it may not have worked because of a trick by the Conservatives who've put down their own motion. The Labour position may never be voted on. Labour MPs may end up having to rebel, nevertheless voting for an immediate ceasefire, but just the one as advocated by the SNP, an unideal situation for Keir Starmer. All of this, Anna, essentially because politicians of different stripes are looking to politicise in the domestic arena what's going on in the Middle East. None of that is going to help anybody who is currently in Gaza or in Israel.
Rhiannon and Sam, thank you. Well, the poisonous aftermath of the attacks of October the 7th has shown no respect for age. The father of a baby girl who says his daughter's British birth certificate, was defaced after he sent it off as part of a passport application, said being Jewish is very hard in the UK at the moment. Well, the certificate was ripped and the word Israel scribbled out. He was speaking to our communities correspondent, Becky Johnson.
It took us a moment or two to understand that my baby, she's been a victim of discrimination from someone within the system.
This is his 5-month-old daughter Ronnie's birth certificate, ripped so it's no longer valid. Her father's birthplace, Israel, scribbled out. It was returned to them like this after they sent it to the Home Office for her passport application. Her father, whose name is also Israel, believes it was deliberate and anti-Semitic.
My baby, she's 5 months old. What they have to do with where her father was born? This is I don't know, this is horrendous. This person immediately needs to be sacked.
He's now planning to report it to the police.
I don't feel confidence to send any official paper to the Home Office or anywhere else. The government need to re-vet the people who are working in the public sector.
Ronnie is the youngest of his 3 children. He now fears for their safety growing up in London, where he says he's witnessed the anger over Israel's action in Gaza.
People can see you with wearing a couple on the street and they can tell you, free Palestine. What is it to do with my religious? There is nothing to do with my religion. It's no, I'm not going to any Muslim in the street and tell him I have problem with you because what happened in October the 7th. Things are bubbling. And the people that are now chanting on the street, in next generation, they can sit on the Prime Minister's seat.
The Home Office says the government will not tolerate anti-Semitism and it's urgently investigating what happened to the birth certificate.
You can debate if what Israel doing is legitimate or not, but firstly, you cannot debate that if Israel is legitimate as a state or not. And just scribble it out is like saying, no, you are not legitimate. If my daughter will ask me one day that what happened to the Britain, I will show her this is what happened to the Great Britain.
It is, he says, a symbol of what life has become for British Jews. Becky Johnson, Sky News, North London.
The search for the man accused of carrying out a chemical alkali attack on his ex-partner and her children appears to be over tonight. Police searching for Abdul Azidi have recovered a body with his distinctive clothing from the River Thames. Ivor Bennett reports.
This is the moment police believe they finally found Abdul Azidi. Officers were filmed pulling a body from the Thames yesterday, 3 weeks after the Clapham chemical attack. It hasn't been formally identified yet, but detectives are confident it's him.
Because of the amount of time that the body has been in the water, It's not been obvious to do an easy visual identification or indeed get immediate fingerprints. However, with the very distinctive clothing that was being worn and the property that we found on the body, we are able to strongly believe that this is Abdul Azidi.
Azidi's suspected of carrying out this attack, a brutal assault with a corrosive alkali on his ex-partner and her young children. Azidi himself was also injured before he went on the run. The last sighting was later that night on Chelsea Bridge, where police believe he entered the water.
The body was recovered here, near Tower Bridge, 5 miles from where Azidi was last seen. But even though police believe their search for him is now over, they say their investigation into the attack continues.
That's because they're yet to speak to the victim, who remains in hospital. A friend posted, "We know she's lost her sight in one eye and we're praying that it returns fully in the other. She's already making so much progress and is determined to get out of hospital as quickly as possible. But physically and mentally, there is a very, very long road ahead for her and the girls." While police will now use DNA and dental records to identify Azidi. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
The mother of one of the victims of the Nottingham triple killer has told Sky News how she burst into tears with relief when she heard that his sentence will be reviewed. The Attorney General has referred Valdo Kalokani's case to the Court of Appeal after she concluded the sentence was unduly lenient. Kalokani was given an indefinite hospital order for stabbing to death 3 people in the city last June. Our Midlands correspondent Becky Cottrell reports.
All their families want is justice. Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates. The 3 were stabbed to death by this man, Valdo Kalokani, a paranoid schizophrenic who is serving his sentence not in a prison but in a secure psychiatric facility. Now the families of those he killed have been told his sentence is going to be reviewed by the Court of Appeal. Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother, says she cried when she heard the news.
I call him the monster, but if Kalokani was out in 20 years, he'd only be 52 years old. He'd have decades and decades left. And what we were pleased to hear is the recognition that the hospital order carries no penal elements and that there should be a penal element.
That recognition coming from the Attorney General, who said, having received detailed legal advice and considered the issues raised very carefully, I've concluded that the sentence imposed against Kalokani for the offences of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility and attempted murder was unduly lenient and will be referred to the Court of Appeal. Her decision took the relatives of Grace, Barnaby and Ian by surprise and gave them hope, but it came just after they received another shock. Nottinghamshire police have said that in the aftermath of the attacks, 11 officers viewed material related to the case without a legitimate reason to. An officer then posted a message about what they'd seen on a WhatsApp group, a message that's been described as crude and distasteful. 3 officers have faced disciplinary action, with one of them being sacked. In a statement, Superintendent Andrew Reynolds said, "We have taken these matters extremely seriously. Those who access material without any legitimate policing purpose can expect the harshest of sanctions, including dismissal from the organisation."
It's sickening, it's abhorrent voyeurism, and it's inexcusable.
Grace, Barnaby and Ian's relatives have said they can't begin to grieve yet because they're still fighting for answers and accountability. They feel they still have a long way to go. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham.
Last year, we revealed the desperate measures taken by some parents following big increases in the price of baby formula, with some shoplifting or buying open containers from online sellers. Now, the competition watchdog has launched an investigation into the baby formula market. The Competition and Markets Authority's autumn report into price inflation found that the average price of infant formula had risen by 25% over the previous 2 years. During that period, the price of even the cheapest brand, Aldi's Mamia, jumped by 45%. Well, the market is dominated by 2 companies, Danone and Nestlé. Last month, Danone reduced the price it sells Aptamil to retailers by up to 7%. But the CMA says prices overall still remain historically high. Our national correspondent, Tom Palmenter, reports.
It's quite simple. Baby formula is too expensive for too many families.
I hate the price.
I hate it.
I hate it. You go down the aisle and you think, well, that's half of my food budget for the week. Gone on formula.
The Competition and Markets Authority is already investigating the formula milk industry, but it has now announced a further step. It's launched a market study with added legal powers to ensure it can gather the information it needs.
It means the CMA is taking this to another level, giving its investigation real teeth and using its power to scrutinise the claim that families are being exploited with unjustifiably high prices.
The investigation is due to report to the government in September.
You're not going to see a change really till potentially next year, if that. You know, it's not quick enough, it's not soon enough. It should have already been sorted and dealt with by now.
It does feel like progress. It's taken a while. It's a shame that it's got to this point, but yes, definitely. Let's just hope that it makes a difference and that they're listened to.
Lynn is a foster parent who cares for babies. She's had nearly 40 boys and girls over the years here in Grimsby, all reliant on baby formula.
I think people have just been accepting it. So the fact that it's now acknowledged as a problem means that the companies have to relook at the pricing. If you look at the company's profits, that will tell you that they are profiteering and they need to bring that down. Baby milk, baby formula should not be about profits. It should be about being available to feed the babies.
Their voices are now being heard. Prices are slowly starting to come down. But if the CMA confirms what many suspect is going on, the UK government will be expected to act. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
The mother of Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny has appealed to President Putin to release his body immediately for burial. Lyudmila Navalnaya also accused the Russian leader of killing her son as she laid flowers at a memorial devoted to political prisoners today. The Kremlin has denied any involvement with his death in prison.
За моей спиной находится колония К3, полярный волк.
Behind me is the K3 colony Polar Wolf, where on February the 16th, my son Alexei Navalny died. I haven't been able to see him for 5 days. His body hasn't been handed to me. I'm not being told where he is. I'm addressing you, Vladimir Putin. The solution to the issue depends only on you. Let me finally see my son. I demand that Alexei's body is immediately returned to me so that I can bury him humanely.
2 Russian nationals have been arrested in an international operation led by the UK's National Crime Agency and the FBI, targeting one of the world's most notorious cybercrime gangs. Lockbit provided ransomware as a service to affiliates who infected organisations' networks and held victims' data for ransom. The founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, said he was too ill to appear at the High Court today for his final bid to appeal against a ruling over his extradition to the United States. The 2-day hearing will decide whether the 52-year-old can ask an appeal court to block the extradition to face spying charges. Now, it's one thing to have to pay higher council tax. It is another to also face reductions in services. That is what is facing residents in a number of English councils effectively declared bankrupt in recent months. But people pretty much everywhere are facing higher bills, increasing by nearly 5% from April. Sky's political correspondent Matthew Thompson reports now from Woking.
The Surrey borough of Woking is bankrupt. As a result, services like this vital community hub are at risk.
Have you got any? No.
A local charity is stepping in to salvage what it can. And here at the local Scrabble afternoon, they aren't short of words to describe the situation.
Well, they're cutting out a lot of the public toilets. What they expect people to do? Take your drawers down wet in the ground? I mean, it's ridiculous.
I belong to a religious group that meets here on a Saturday, and we got to find somewhere else to go.
Woking is the most indebted council in the country. That's largely the result of risky investments in skyscrapers like these, which have become symbols of financial mismanagement.
We need to live within our means. We haven't been doing that for a number of years, and that's what we're doing with these budget changes. Taking grants away from community groups that do fantastic work in our local area is incredibly painful. What I do feel is some relief that we've looked for innovative solutions.
The dire financial situation means that Woking Council is having to make millions of pounds of cuts at the same time as increasing council tax by as much as 10%, meaning people here are paying more and getting less. But it's not just Woking. A similar picture is emerging right across the country. 128 local councils plan to hike council tax by just under 5%. The rises mean that the average Band D council tax of £2,065 will rise by £103. 4 bankrupt councils, Birmingham, Woking, Slough and Thurrock, have been given special dispensation by the government to raise council tax by up to 10%.
Central government has effectively willed increases in taxation onto local governments. What that means is council tax goes up fast in real terms, and that bears on lower income households because council tax is disproportionately focused on lower income households.
It's no secret that the government's hopes for a poll boost are hung on more tax cuts. But if people see their local taxes going up whilst service levels fall, politically, that could spell trouble for the Conservatives. Matthew Thompson, Sky News in Woking.
Well, it's taken 15 months, and if you're a Manchester United fan, it must feel a lifetime. But finally tonight, there is confirmation that the Glazer family have handed over control of the club's footballing operations to a British billionaire. Our sports correspondent, Rob Habis, joins us now for the latest. And Rob, Sir Jim Ratcliffe finally then has his club.
He does. The local lad, the boyhood Manchester United fan, completing a deal to buy 27.7% of Manchester United. It's going to cost him £1.3 billion, including promised investment in Old Trafford. It isn't the full sale that fans had been calling for, but it does end the Glazers' control of football operations after 19 years. The debt is all still there, but now we have Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who's going to be overseeing things. And in a statement tonight, he said, "To become co-owner of Manchester United is a great honour and comes with great responsibility. This marks the completion of the transaction, but just the beginning of our journey to take Manchester United back to the top of English, European and world football with world-class facilities for our fans. Work to achieve these objectives will accelerate from today." And already, before completing the deal, change is already afoot. They've got a new chief executive, Omar Barada, who's been brought in from great rivals Manchester City. They've lined up a sporting director who could be brought in at great cost from Newcastle. And for fans, it's about restoring the confidence, the greatness of the team and infrastructure that has fallen behind rivals like Manchester City. They're now funded by Abu Dhabi, in part, the dominant force that Manchester United once were. They haven't won a title in the Premier League since 2013. It's a long wait, and they're now 6th in the Premier League. The hope with Sir Jim Ratcliffe and his Ineos petrochemical fortune is that he can take United back to the top of football.
Rob Harris, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you. And certainly among the stories we will be discussing tonight, this on the front page of The Sun, their headline, Brit nuke sub launch fails. Explain more on that when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. Pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza is growing, with Prince William calling for the fighting to end as soon as possible, and America hinting it may put its own resolution to the UN calling for a temporary cessation in fighting. The father of a baby girl whose birth certificate was defaced with the word Israel scribbled out has called on the government to sack the person responsible. And police searching for Abdul Azidi, who's accused of carrying out a chemical attack in South London, have recovered a body with his distinctive clothing from the River Thames. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj, and the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. So to the front pages, as ever, let's start with that. And we kick off with The Sun and an exclusive story revealing that one of the United Kingdom's nuclear subs carried out a failed Trident missile test launch while the Defence Secretary was on board. The Daily Mail goes with Prince William's comments that too many people have died in Gaza and calling for an end to the conflict. This is The Times. Prince issues Gaza plea for a permanent peace. And it's also the lead story for The Telegraph. Meanwhile, The Guardian says the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is facing more dissent within his own party over his policy on Gaza, despite his calls for a ceasefire. The Express has the latest remarks from Rishi Sunak about illegal migrants and how he feels they're jumping the queue to come here. The Metro leading with claims that the government knew as far back as 2016 that a secret investigation by the Post Office into problems with the Horizon computer system had been dropped, even though it could have prevented the wrongful conviction of sub-postmasters for fraud and theft. Financial Times reporting that Barclays shareholders are to have £10 billion returned to them as part of a plan to boost revenue and move away from investment banking. Well, The Star tells us about a huge black hole in space which is apparently eating large amounts of the universe. I'm not sure large amounts of the universe is exactly accurate, but that story was around yesterday. They're a bit late today. Anyway, don't forget, scan the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Ali and to Sonia. Lots of elements about the prospects of a ceasefire for Gaza, lots of pushes and pulls from different areas. So let's kick off with the international element of this, shall we? What happened at the UN and what the United States is now going to do about it, Sonia?
Yes, so the US is circulating a draft UN Security Council resolution which essentially would warn Israel against launching a major ground offensive in Rafah, which is the part of the Gaza Strip where there are 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering. Many of them have moved from other parts of the Strip. And this is really significant because we know that for a while now, behind the scenes, Biden and American diplomats have been putting pressure on Israel to exercise restraint, given the dreadful humanitarian toll that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip. But this would be a very public act, obviously, a UN Security Council resolution, and it would be sort of the strongest signal that the US has sent Israel yet, that it should not go ahead in Rafah and that it needs to be exercising more restraint than it's been showing. So I think it's actually a really, really significant moment. And then what's going on internationally, which I'm sure we're going to come on to speak to, there is a shifting position within the UK of political parties as well, which reflects, I think, the fact that the US is changing its position. We have this thing in the UK where quite often both the opposition and the government will kind of take its lead from America.
Yeah. Well, just on America very quickly before we move on to what's going to happen in Parliament as well, is, how significant is this shift by the States? If it is ignored by Netanyahu and Biden grows stronger in his calls for a cessation in hostilities, even if temporary, what does that say about the relationship? And will there be calls, do you think, for America to simply pull the weaponry that it's sending to Israel to carry out any future offensive in Rafah?
Well, there might be. Look, it's an election year. Joe Biden wants this calmed down as quickly as possible. There has been a tremendous loss of life. Obviously, 1,200 Israeli citizens killed on October the 7th and 29,000, according to the Gaza-run health ministry, and thousands more completely displaced. I mean, the UN numbers are absolutely horrendous. Now, Sonia is right to point out that 1.5 million people are in Rafah. They've got nowhere to go. That is the problem here. Now, at the moment, the US at the UN today has vetoed another ceasefire call from 22 Arab states that put forward a ceasefire motion on the basis that simply calling for a ceasefire will not deal with the hostages issue. And we also know that there are these back-channel negotiations, as we understand, with Qatar involved, which are really working around a three-stage process. One is to get the guns falling silent, the hostages to be released, aid in, but more importantly, a grand bargain for all of this, which will be Saudi recognition of Israel, and then longer down the track, a two-state solution, which seems to be like a fig leaf on the horizon at the moment. But this will come to a head. If Biden puts pressure on Israel and Netanyahu ignores it, what does Biden then do? Does he withdraw the actual weaponry that is being provided to Israel? If that happened, that would be a huge moment. Simply saying to Israel to stop, I'm not sure. I think Netanyahu could call his bluff.
Yeah, I think Ali makes a really important point there, which is that there's this sort of public diplomacy, which we're all seeing, and then there is the stuff going on behind the scenes. And, you know, the Gulf states are really, really key in that because, yes, countries can call for a ceasefire and they can publicly call for a ceasefire, but you've got to have a roadmap to get there. And the starting point for a ceasefire has got to be both sides laying down arms, Hamas releasing all the hostages, and then somehow you've got to sort of try and build trust towards something that might look like a lasting peace between these two sides. So it's very much, yes, we're hearing about all the public stuff, but there is another process going on as well, which is actually, I think, in some ways, more important.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to Prince William in a moment, but first of all to The Guardian, because you alluded to what we're expecting in Parliament and what Labour does about it, because obviously we've had resignations, including people like Jess Phillips, you know, well-known. Labour does not want to see any more. But will there be pressure again, do you think, on the Labour leader, facing another threat of revolt, as The Guardian says, over this vote that we're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it very much, it's one of those things where it's really weird because it's this huge international issue, but I think it's going to come down to parliamentary process. So just to explain, there's an opposition day debate, which is what opposition parties can have. It's up to them what they set the topic. The SNP have made it about the need for a ceasefire and have put in, you know, quite a blunt motion like they did before, saying we need a ceasefire immediately. Now, Labour have tabled its own amendment to that motion, which is actually much longer and talks about, you know, Labour for the first time is saying they want an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, but it is putting a lot more flesh on the bones around, well, what needs to happen, including being very clear that Hamas has to release all the hostages and Israel needs to be confident Hamas isn't going to launch another terrorist attack. Then you've got the government that's put its own amendment to this motion, which is probably, you know, Labour's somewhere in the middle of the three motions. So the tricky thing for Starmer will be, so the Speaker can either select the Labour amendment to the SNP motion, in which case Starmer's probably home and dry, because I don't think there'll be a rebellion in that case. I think Labour backbenchers, including those who rebelled last time, will vote for the Labour motion. Slightly more complicated is if the Speaker selects a government amendment and it's a government amendment that goes through, and then what happens? Do Labour MPs vote for or against it? But I think a lot of people at home will be sitting there thinking, why are we talking about parliamentary procedure when, you know, this is a huge international crisis?
And people are watching it on their phones, the pictures from Gaza.
And obviously it matters what the UK says, but, you know, the SNP want a motion that just says, you know, ceasefire now. Labour are quite rightly pointing out, well, there's no point just calling for it. We may be in government. We need a roadmap for how to get there. And, you know,
Isn't it also, Sonia, about the fact that Starmer is trying to balance, on the one hand, charges of anti-Semitism, and he's really tried to detoxify his party since the Corbyn era. Now, admittedly, in the last week, he's had a very tough time. He had to suspend one Labour MP and also basically withdraw support from another in a by-election, which is highly embarrassing for the party because it's going to have no candidate effectively on the ballot paper, although they will appear as the Labour candidate, but they won't have any support, this Azhar Ali thing. And on the other hand, he's got a lot of people thinking that he's been completely weak on this ceasefire issue. So if parliamentary procedure tomorrow shows that the Speaker of the House does not call on the Labour amendment, then what does Labour do? Does it back the SNP call for a ceasefire? Because I tell you, the pressure on Starmer is becoming unbearable within elements of his own party. Now, he may make a calculation that, there are 2 million Muslim votes in this country, maybe most of them may be voting for Labour. Can he afford to let them go? Maybe he makes that calculation that it doesn't matter that much. But I can tell you, about 50 people resigned, 50 people went against the motion last time in November when the SNP brought it, including 8 front bench resignations. It's a very difficult situation for him.
So, and into this melee, into this difficult and very, very sensitive issue, comes the heir to the throne, Prince William.
Yes. So he's doing a couple of visits to the Middle East. He's just done one, and he's released a statement which is, I think, very unusual. It's fair to say, particularly because it's not the monarch; it's the heir to the throne. The one thing I will say though is that I think the statement. I mean, there's not a lot of meat to it in the sense he's not calling for some. He's not sort of. It's hard to see a statement as a political intervention in the sense that, it expresses massive regret for what's gone on, for, the awful atrocities that happened on October the 7th, for the innocent people who've lost their lives in Gaza, and says that this needs to come to an end as soon as possible. He doesn't use the word ceasefire. I'm sure not many people would disagree with the hope that it would come to an end as soon as possible. And it's not really out of line with the government's position. I think if the heir to the throne had come out and said you could see sort of clear blue water between where the government is, where the Foreign Secretary is, and where the heir to the throne is, that would be a lot more controversial. But this feels like quite a high-level general statement.
I think that...
You take a different view?
I'm slightly concerned about it because, look, I understand exactly, I empathise with exactly where Prince William's coming from. He clearly cares deeply about this issue, as I'm sure his father does. These people are very balanced, measured individuals. They care deeply about the rise in anti-Semitism in the country, the attacks that took place on October the 7th, and also the loss of life on the Gazan side. So I understand that. But the problem is, this is a highly emotive, very charged issue with very strong opinions globally and also in this country. Now, if you're the heir to the throne, you have to tread very, very carefully on this. Now, you get a little bit more leeway as Prince of Wales than you do as monarch, but not that much. So it's very, very delicate. Downing Street does not clearly want a rift with Prince William, so they're saying he hasn't really gone against the government line. But the government hasn't really been talking that much about the fact that too many have died in Gaza at all, really. What it's been basically saying is, well, what has it been saying? I mean, it's effectively backing the Israeli position. That's its prerogative. It's still providing arms to Israel. So I do think there's a little bit of a departure there, but clearly they don't want to row. I would just tread very carefully if I was the heir to the throne. I think it's very, very fraught. And the late Queen, may she rest in peace, was always very assiduous about these things. You've got to be seen to be above the fray. And it's hard. It is difficult.
Going to see if I can squeeze 2 quick stories in, if you don't mind. The Sun, trying to squeeze as many shortened words into a headline as ever, I think. Brit nuke sub launch fails. This is while the Defence Secretary was on board, we are told.
Yes, that's right. So it was a test of a Trident missile on the 30th of January. The missile was launched and it failed, and it sort of came down, not, within sort of, close to the launch, I suppose, so everyone could see it. Apparently, it's the second one that's failed in a row. We don't have a huge amount of detail from the story.
Well, the MOD has given us a statement on the back of this.
Right.
They have said HMS Vanguard, the vessel which we're talking about, and her crew have been proven fully capable of operating the UK's continuous at-sea deterrent, passing all tests during a recent demonstration and shakedown operation, a routine test to confirm that the submarine can return to service following deep maintenance work. During the test, an anomaly occurred. As a matter of national security, we cannot provide further information on this. However, we are confident that the anomaly was event-specific, and therefore there are no implications for the reliability of the wider Trident missile system and stock.
Well, that's all right then, isn't it?
Yep.
So basically, if we're being led to believe, which is the current narrative coming out from Western leaders, that Putin's going to attack a NATO state within the next 6 years, as long as there's an event-led specific issue, we shouldn't worry about it.
I mean,
we can't even get HMS the Prince of Wales to leave the port to go into a NATO exercise. We've got a nuke. I mean, what is this, Dad's Army? I mean, we've got a situation here where the Army's recruitment levels are at 75,000 at the moment, and yet at the Munich Security Conference at the weekend, everyone's talking tough on Putin. And the reality is this, J.D. Vance, a Republican senator, made the statement very clearly. They talk tough, the West. They're not going to do anything. Ukraine is spending more munitions in 1 month than the West produces in a year. It's not just about money. It's about munitions and putting your thing on a munitions footing.
I think we need to do a programme on what does work in this country. That might be quite short. Oh, dear. Anyway, right, lots more still to come, including this if we haven't fitted in yet, including the issue first highlighted by Sky News last year, now leading to a markets probe on baby formula prices.
This is Vesper. She's a live sentient canine, and she's my canine partner. We come from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, and Vesper and myself are also a member of International Search and Rescue, ISAR. She was bred by Westminster Police, and she is part of their breeding programme, so she has all the attributes of a working dog. So she's got mental capacity, athleticism, genetics, everything we want, nice disposition.
Yeah.
But very early they identified that she wasn't awfully keen on biting. Oh. So, which might be a bit of a prerequisite for a police dog. Yes. So she was quickly moved into Division 4 detection. So she's very clever, very smart, she's methodical, she's systematic. And when that happened, our paths crossed. Yes, she was part of a keen team that went over to support Turkey after the earthquake and Morocco. So we're deployed under UK ISAR, funded by FCDO. And we get deployed to underdeveloping countries to offer UK aid in times of disaster. So she is a live sentient canine, and what her role is we work together with a team of other dogs, also in a very large team with UK ISAR. The dogs are really critical in their intel to what they give the incident commander. So she will go over collapsed structures, rubble, and she will indicate with a bark indication at orifices or any parts of the rubble where live scent is emanating. And then we can move on and, at a very fast approach, find and identify areas where live scent is emanating so the team can eventually effect a rescue.
Very dangerous job, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And
I
know, she looks like butter wouldn't melt here. Yes, it is, but it is risk assessed. And we are all professionals. We are firefighters from 14 different fire services across the UK, trained professionals, and the dogs are a team member just like everyone else who's valued on it. We are now off to the Kennel Club, where the official launch is of the finalists that will be proceeding to a UK vote to vote for the UK's nation favourite.
Yeah.
Vesper's category is Extraordinary Life for Working Dog.
Yeah.
Which I think had a little bit of a twist in it when she didn't like to bite. She likes people.
Yeah.
One of the little phrases that's been coined is she's a lover, not a fighter.
And how do people vote for her?
She gets on the Kennel Club website. It'll also be tagged on Merseyside Fire and Rescue. So look at all the worthy contenders, all the finalists that are there. Pick your favourite. It's a nice competition. The winners will be launched on Mother's Day in March, and we will be at Crufts. Looking forward to it.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the chief lead writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Well, a story close to Sky News' heart, let's be honest about it, which is the price of baby formula. A probe has been launched because people are really suffering with how they buy the food to feed their children.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a Competition and Markets Authority that has launched an inquiry into this, an investigation. And the reason is that baby formula prices have gone up by 25% in just 2 years. And I didn't realise, actually, how much market domination there was. So it's just two companies, Nestle and Danone, which account for 85% of sales. And you can imagine, I mean, having a baby is such an expensive time anyway. Some women don't want to breastfeed. Some women just can't breastfeed. They are reliant on formula milk. And it's, you know, it's expensive. And 25% in 2 years when there's a cost of living crisis, it's huge. And so what the CMA will be looking at is this purely driven by the cost of the raw ingredients and the labour and the cost of production and shipping, etc., or, you know, this level of market domination by two big players? Is there something else going on that's more akin to sort of price fixing?
Let's move on to the front page of the Times, shall we? It leads on Prince William and his Gaza plea, but also on the side here is the speculation over how Alexei Navalny died. And this is interesting, isn't it?
It is, and it's brutal. What the speculation is that obviously he was in an Arctic penal colony. Yeah. The temperature was minus 27 degrees. They put him outside for longer than an hour, made his blood go basically stone cold, and then there was a punch to the heart, a single punch to the heart, which is apparently what KGB operatives are taught to do, which is absolutely fatal in those conditions. So it doesn't bear thinking about. Thoughts with his family. His wife is very courageous, trying to be steadfast and resolute in what is a horrendous time. They won't even release the body yet because, well, they're saying it's all procedural. We don't know if it's with Novichok or whatever. Now we understand it's this punch to the heart. But absolutely appalling. He was a symbol of the resistance in Russia. Clearly, President Putin's an autocratic dictator with nothing to lose, completely quashes all sorts of dissent whatsoever. But as I say, the West talks a good game on taking Putin on. But frankly, if I was President Zelensky or anyone in Russia, I'd be worried about the West staying power. The West does not have the risk appetite for the long game. You can see that in Afghanistan. You can see it with Pakistan. You can see all of these things. People have been let down by the West. That's the problem.
You can see it with what's going on in the US at the moment with House Republicans, you know, using the aid package, you know, to play domestic politics with.
About the border,
This is, you know, global security. Putin just isn't a threat to Ukraine or through, you know, to dissidents like Navalny. I mean, he's a threat to the West.
And front page of the Daily Telegraph now, also leading on Prince William and Gaza. But again, their right-hand column, Martha's Rule forces doctors to note the instincts of parents. And Martha's Rule allows worried parents to seek out a second opinion. Is that right?
Absolutely. So this is something that one of my colleagues at The Guardian has been campaigning for, Mary P. Mills. So it's incredibly tragic, lost her daughter, Martha, and she died of sepsis. And it was preventable, but the doctors missed it. So this gives parents and carers the right to request a second opinion when they see their child deteriorating. And that means a second team of doctors and nurses, specialists in sort of sepsis intensive care. And I think Merope and her husband Paul will think that they didn't want Martha to die in vain. They wanted to do something for other parents who might find themselves in the same situation.
Sonia and Ali, thank you both very much indeed. See you for the whole of the 11, of course, for now. Thank you. Here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So mostly mild this week with spells of wind and rain, but it will feel noticeably colder by Friday as temperatures return to near average. Most places will start Wednesday mild, wet, windy. The chilly northeast of Scotland will be drier and calmer. Ireland and Northern Ireland will see rain clearing during the morning, leaving sunshine and just a few showers. Meanwhile, rain over Britain will extend into the far northeast, but will turn lighter and patchier from the west. Mild again, windy with gales near western and Channel coasts.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, our press preview continues in Sky News at 11. Prince William making that rare intervention, calling for fighting in Gaza to end as soon as possible. A look at the papers continues after this break.